Listen to me now and believe me later. This is not just a speech. This is a power move. When Trump tried to flex, India did not back down. India hit back. This is about strength, about respect, and about showing the world that when you challenge a nation with power and pride, you better be ready for the comeback. Let's pump up the truth and crush the doubts, because India does not play defense. India hits back. Strength respects strength. This is a universal truth that has echoed through history, in politics, in sports, in business, and even in our daily lives. When two forces meet, there is always a natural understanding that only power commands power. India, as a rising global force, has stepped into this space with the clarity that it will not bow, it will not bend, and it will not compromise its dignity simply to please another power. When President Trump threw challenges toward India, the response was not weak negotiation or silence. It was a firm reminder that India is no longer the country that accepts dictates from outside. It is the country that stands up, flexes its strength, and shows the world that respect must be mutual. Strength is not only about military might, although that is one pillar. It is not only about economic numbers, although those statistics are vital. True strength is also about character, willpower, and the refusal to accept second-class treatment. India demonstrated this when it responded firmly to Trump's moves, whether on trade tariffs or diplomatic pressure. Instead of retreating, India hit back, showing that it had the courage to defend its own interests. That moment sent a signal not only to the United States, but also to the world: you cannot talk down to India. You cannot demand submission. If you want cooperation, you must come with respect, because this nation understands its worth. Strength respects strength because weakness invites exploitation. History has shown this again and again. The nations that bend too easily are the ones that are trampled on. But when a nation shows backbone, when it proves that it can push back, suddenly the tone changes. Trump himself built his image on being a man of force, someone who wanted to negotiate hard, press his advantage, and never show weakness. But when he faced India's steel, when he realized that his words would be met with action, he too had to adjust his stance. That is how the world works. Even the toughest leaders respect only those who stand tall and refuse to be intimidated. India has carried this philosophy throughout its journey. In the past, it may have been underestimated or viewed as a developing country still finding its place. But today, the message is clear. India is a powerhouse, and it will not accept disrespect. The balance of global relations depends on equality, not submission. And when India flexes, it reminds others that respect is not granted automatically. It is earned by demonstrating that you are ready to defend your dignity. This is why strength respects strength. It is not arrogance, it is reality. Consider the way India handled Trump's tariff policies. Instead of complaining endlessly or begging for concessions, India chose the bold route. It imposed its own retaliatory tariffs. That was not a small step. It was a clear declaration that if you play hardball, India will play hardball too. That move resonated across the world. It told other countries that India is not afraid to act, and the result, Trump, who always positioned himself as the master of deal-making, was forced to acknowledge that India was no pushover. He might not have admitted it directly, but his tone shifted, because even the loudest voices go quiet when they realize they are up against a wall of determination. Strength also operates on the level of perception. When a nation shows that it cannot be dominated, it automatically earns respect even from those who disagree with it. This is why India's stance mattered so much. The respect gained was not only from America, but from other countries watching closely. They saw a nation of one, 3 billion standing with confidence, refusing to be dictated to, and that builds credibility, that builds influence. In international relations, perception often shapes reality. If you are seen as strong, you are treated as strong. If you are seen as weak, you are treated as expendable. India understood this, and its actions reinforced the principle that only equals can negotiate as equals. Strength respects strength because it creates balance. Without balance, there is domination, and domination breeds resentment, instability, and conflict. By pushing back against Trump, India preserved not only its own dignity, but also the principle of fairness in global affairs. It reminded everyone that no nation, no matter how powerful, has the right to impose its will unilaterally. That is not partnership, that is coercion, and coercion cannot last in a world where rising powers are determined to claim their space. India's assertive response was not about hostility. It was not about breaking ties. It was about ensuring that the relationship was one of equals. For too long, the pattern in global politics has been the bigger powers trying to dictate terms. But that era is fading. The rise of India is the rise of a new mindset. Respect us, and we will respect you. Try to dominate us, and we will hit back harder. That is how equilibrium is established. That is how strong nations communicate with one another, through the language of strength. India refuses to be bullied. This is not just a slogan, not just a reaction to one moment in history, but a deep-rooted attitude born out of centuries of struggle, resilience, and survival. India has faced empires, invasions, colonization, exploitation, and yet it has never surrendered its spirit. The world has tried again and again to impose its will, but every time, India has risen, adapted, fought back, and emerged stronger. When Trump thought he could use pressure tactics against India, he underestimated this very spirit. He believed that economic threats, diplomatic pressure, or harsh words could force India to bow down. But what he did not realize is that this is a nation that has endured much greater storms, and bullying only makes it stand taller. When Trump imposed tariffs on Indian goods, he expected India to negotiate from a position of weakness. The assumption was that India, needing access to the American market, would quietly accept whatever terms were offered. But India responded differently. Instead of folding, it matched strength with strength. Retaliatory tariffs were introduced. Diplomatic language grew firmer. The message was clear. India is willing to engage in fair dialogue, but it will not bend under pressure. That stance changed the dynamics of the conversation. It showed the world that even in front of a president known for his aggressive tactics, India would not let itself be cornered. The refusal to be bullied comes from a sense of self-respect. A nation of more than 1 billion people, with a rapidly growing economy and strong military power, cannot and should not be treated like a minor player. India has earned its place at the global table, and it is no longer the India of decades ago that could be pressured with aid packages or threats of sanctions. Today's India understands that respect is tied to self-assertion. If you allow yourself to be bullied once, you invite it again and again. But when you push back, when you show that you will not tolerate unfairness, suddenly the balance shifts. That is why India chose resistance over submission, even if the path was more difficult. Trump's style of negotiation was famously combative. He liked to push his opponents into corners, to overwhelm them with demands, and to extract concessions by appearing unrelenting. Many countries struggled to counter this approach. But India proved to be different. Rather than being intimidated, it treated Trump's tactics as a challenge. It said, in action and in words, "We are not afraid of confrontation, and we will not accept terms that diminish our dignity." That was a bold stand. It was also a calculated one, because India knew that once it allowed itself to be bullied, the precedent would affect not just its relationship with the United States, but with other nations as well. This refusal to be bullied also comes from the confidence of a rising power. India's growing technological sector, its large market, and its geopolitical importance make it a country that others cannot simply ignore or dismiss. When India draws a line, the world pays attention. Trump may have thought that his America First approach would put other nations on the defensive, but India countered with its own vision of self-reliance and national pride. It reminded everyone that while partnerships are welcome, they cannot come at the cost of sovereignty. That core belief fueled India's resistance. On the global stage, refusing to be bullied is also about setting an example. Smaller nations often look to larger powers to see how they handle pressure from dominant countries. When India stood up to Trump's tactics, it was not only defending itself, but also showing the world that no nation, however powerful, should dictate terms unfairly. That ripple effect mattered. It built respect for India among nations that often face similar challenges. By refusing to bow down, India positioned itself as a voice for fairness and balance in international relations. Bullying is effective only against those who fear loss more than they value respect. India has reached a stage where it understands that temporary economic strain or diplomatic tension is a smaller price compared to the long-term consequences of submission. If it had allowed Trump to dictate terms, the damage to its global standing would have been far greater than the cost of tariffs. This clarity gave India the courage to absorb short-term challenges in order to secure long-term respect. India's stand was also rooted in its democratic character. A nation driven by the will of its people cannot be easily bullied because its leaders are accountable to public opinion. The people of India expect their government to defend national pride, not compromise it. Any sign of weakness would have been unacceptable to the citizens, and this democratic force gave even more weight to India's refusal. Unlike countries where decisions are taken behind closed doors without accountability, India had to show its people and the world that it would not kneel. India refuses to be bullied because its identity is built on resilience. Colonization tried to break it, wars tried to weaken it, economic struggles tested it, and yet it endured. Every hardship became a lesson, every confrontation became a stepping stone. Trump's attempt to impose his will was just another moment in that long story, and India's reaction was in line with its history. To give in would have been to betray the sacrifices of the past and the ambitions of the future. That is why the answer was firm resistance. Economic muscle on display is one of the most powerful signals a nation can send to the world. In today's global order, strength is not measured only by tanks, jets, or soldiers. It is measured by markets, production, innovation, and the ability to influence global trade. India, when it hit back at Trump, was not just speaking the language of diplomacy or pride. It was showing its economic weight, using its market as a weapon, and proving that financial clout can be just as powerful as military might. This was not an emotional reaction, but a calculated demonstration of economic resilience and capability. When Trump imposed tariffs on Indian goods, his administration believed that India would quietly absorb the blow. The assumption was simple: America was the bigger economy, the more powerful trading partner, and India would not dare to retaliate. But what happened instead was remarkable. India responded with counter-tariffs, targeting American products strategically. This was more than a defensive move. It was a way of saying, we have leverage too. The world watched as India used its massive consumer base and growing influence in international trade to remind Washington that economic aggression would not go unanswered. India's economic strength lies not just in its size, but in its diversity. With a population of more than 1 billion people, it offers one of the largest consumer markets in the world. American companies rely heavily on this market for growth, whether in technology, agriculture, or manufacturing. By leveraging tariffs, India was sending a clear message to American businesses. If you support policies that try to bully India, you may pay the price in lost opportunities. That kind of pressure works because corporations have influence over political decisions, and they understand that losing access to India's market is not something to be taken lightly. This display of economic muscle also highlighted India's confidence in its own self-reliance. For too long, developing nations were told that they could not afford to push back against larger economies because they were dependent on them. But India showed that it was prepared to absorb shocks, to endure short-term losses, and to protect its long-term sovereignty. The retaliatory tariffs were a declaration that India values respect more than dependency. It was a way of turning economic defense into a statement of independence. At the same time, India's booming industries gave it the power to negotiate from a position of strength. Its IT sector, pharmaceutical industry, and rapidly expanding manufacturing base are all crucial players in the global economy. Countries around the world rely on India for software services, affordable medicines, and increasingly industrial production. This creates a web of interdependence. By flexing its economic muscle, India was reminding the United States that trade is not a one-way street. It is a partnership, and both sides bring value to the table. Without India, many global supply chains would stumble, and that recognition enhances India's leverage. Another critical aspect of India's economic show of strength was its agricultural sector. By imposing tariffs on American agricultural products, such as almonds and apples, India chose targets carefully. These were goods that had strong political weight in the United States because they were tied to key farming states. By hitting these products, India ensured that American farmers would feel the pain, and in turn, they would pressure their government to reconsider its stance. This was a strategic move, a way of turning economic measures into political influence. It demonstrated that India was not only strong, but also smart in the way it used its economic tools. The global perception of India changed through this confrontation. Nations around the world saw that India was not just a market to be exploited, but a force that could push back when necessary. This increased India's credibility on the international stage. Investors, policymakers, and other governments began to view India not as a passive player, but as a country capable of defending its interests. That credibility is a form of economic capital in itself, because respect translates into better partnerships and stronger positions in future negotiations. India's economic muscle was also visible in its long-term vision. While the tariffs were a short-term response, the underlying strategy was about building greater self-reliance. Initiatives to strengthen domestic industries, promote local manufacturing, and reduce dependency on imports showed that India was preparing itself to be even stronger in the future. This vision made the retaliatory measures even more credible because they were not isolated actions. They were part of a broader philosophy of asserting India's place as an economic powerhouse. Trump, who prided himself on being a businessman before being a politician, could not ignore this reality. He understood the language of deals and money better than anything else, and when India put its economic power on display, it spoke directly in that language. It was a reminder that in business, as in politics, respect comes only when both sides recognize each other's value. India proved that it had the weight, the confidence, and the strategy to protect its value and to demand fair treatment in return. Global stage demands global voice. In the world of international politics and power, silence is often mistaken for weakness. Nations that do not speak up are either ignored or sidelined. India, by hitting back at Trump, showed that it is not just another participant in the global conversation, but a voice that demands to be heard, a voice that carries weight, and a voice that cannot be dismissed. The global stage is not a place for quiet submission. It is a place where every nation that seeks respect must speak with clarity, confidence, and conviction. India understood this reality and stepped forward to prove that it has both the right and the power to make itself heard. The global stage is shaped by competition, by clashing interests, and by constant negotiations. In this environment, only those who assert themselves are able to shape outcomes. Trump's America First policy was designed to push America's agenda aggressively on the world. Many nations hesitated to respond because they feared losing favor with Washington, but India chose a different path. It refused to be a passive listener in this theater. Instead, it placed its voice firmly on the table. By retaliating to tariffs, by speaking openly about fairness, and by signaling that it will not be sidelined, India transformed itself from being a recipient of global policies into a contributor and challenger of those policies. That shift mattered not just for India, but for the entire world that watched. The demand for a global voice is also tied to responsibility. India is the world's largest democracy, representing more than 1 billion people. To remain silent in the face of unfair treatment would have meant betraying the aspirations of those people. A nation of such size and influence has the responsibility to use its voice not only for itself, but for others who cannot speak as strongly. Smaller countries, often bullied by powerful economies, saw in India's actions an example of courage. They saw that even when facing a superpower like the United States, a firm voice could make a difference. By taking a stand, India amplified not just its own position, but also the principle that fairness and equality should guide global interactions. On the global stage, perception is everything. A nation that speaks with hesitation is treated with hesitation. A nation that speaks with force is treated with force. India's decision to respond to Trump decisively ensured that its image was one of strength and confidence. It was not just the act of tariffs, it was the symbolism of defiance, the refusal to be cowed down. That symbolism echoed far beyond Washington. It reached Europe, Asia, Africa, and Latin America, where nations observed that India was willing to challenge the strongest voice in the room. That perception of boldness elevated India's position, giving it greater influence in other negotiations and partnerships. India's global voice also comes from its values. Unlike many powers that use coercion, India has always framed its presence on the global stage with a commitment to fairness, democracy, and mutual respect. When it hit back at Trump, it was not out of hostility, but out of a belief that relationships must be balanced. This added moral weight to its voice. It was not just about money or politics, it was about principle, and principles resonate on the global stage because they inspire confidence in allies and respect even among rivals. The rise of India as a global voice is also connected to its economic and strategic power. A growing economy, a strong military, and an expanding role in international institutions all contribute to its ability to speak with authority. But what truly defines a voice is the courage to use it. Many nations possess resources but still remain silent in fear of consequences. India showed that it is not afraid to risk short-term discomfort for long-term credibility. That courage is what makes a voice global rather than regional. The demand for a global voice is also about shaping the future. The world is changing, with power centers shifting and new alliances forming. If India remains silent, others will define the future in ways that may not serve its interests. By asserting itself now, by showing strength against Trump's aggression, India laid down a marker. It will not be a spectator in history. It will be an active shaper of global rules, trade policies, and diplomatic norms. That determination to influence the future is what makes its voice indispensable on the world stage. Finally, India's decision to speak strongly also redefined its relationship with the United States. Rather than being seen as a junior partner, it projected itself as an equal. Equality is possible only when both sides respect each other's voices. By standing firm, India demanded that respect. It proved that global partnerships cannot be built on domination, but only on dialogue between strong voices. In doing so, India reminded the world that the global stage is not about size alone, but about the willingness to assert one's presence with clarity and resolve. Self-reliance is real power. The ability of a nation to stand tall without depending excessively on others is the ultimate marker of strength. When India hit back at Trump, the move was not just about retaliatory tariffs or diplomatic pushback. It was a declaration of self-confidence rooted in the belief that India could absorb shocks, endure challenges, and carve its own path without begging for concessions. This was a signal to the world that true independence is not just political, but also economic, strategic, and psychological. Self-reliance transforms a country from being vulnerable to being unshakable. For too long in history, India, like many developing nations, was seen through the lens of dependency. The narrative often painted it as a country needing aid, needing external validation, or needing powerful nations to support its growth. That perception gave larger powers leverage to dictate terms, but modern India is rewriting that story. With a growing economy, a vast talent pool, and an expanding domestic market, it is no longer desperate for handouts or external direction. When Trump thought he could use economic threats to corner India, the response proved that dependency was no longer the framework. India demonstrated that it had the internal resources and resilience to push back, to take losses if needed, and to still maintain dignity. Self-reliance is not about isolation from the world. It is about engaging with the world from a position of strength. India's decision to impose counter-tariffs showed that it was not afraid of losing American markets, because it had faith in its own industries and the ability to diversify partnerships. This act revealed an underlying truth. When you are self-reliant, you negotiate from equality, not desperation. You don't beg for access, you demand fairness. That shift in posture is what gives a nation power in the modern age. India's agricultural, technological, and industrial sectors all played a role in reinforcing this image of self-reliance. Agriculture provided the base to secure food sovereignty, making India less dependent on imports for survival. Technology created a platform for innovation that reached global markets. The pharmaceutical sector supplied affordable medicine to the world, proving that India was not just a consumer, but also a producer of value. Each of these areas added layers of confidence that India could stand on its own legs. That confidence translated into a refusal to be bullied or manipulated by external economic pressure. Self-reliance also meant psychological strength. Nations that constantly look outside for approval often compromise too easily. Nations that know their own worth do not. India's leadership reflected this mindset when it refused to allow Trump's harsh tactics to dictate policy. Instead of acting out of fear of losing trade benefits, India acted from the conviction that it could build alternative pathways if required. That inner resilience is more powerful than any statistic. It shapes the way others see you and the way you see yourself. Another important dimension of self-reliance is long-term strategy. India's response to Trump was not just about the present conflict. It was tied to larger initiatives aimed at building domestic manufacturing, strengthening supply chains, and encouraging indigenous innovation. The vision of making India a hub of production and innovation was already in motion, and the confrontation with Trump accelerated the urgency of that goal. By focusing on self-reliance, India was not only responding to one challenge, but also preparing to handle many future challenges without dependence on foreign goodwill. Self-reliance also becomes a shield in international relations. When a country cannot be threatened with aid cuts, market closures, or sanctions, it is harder to manipulate. India's firm response demonstrated that shield. By showing it could hit back, it proved that external pressure would not bend its policies. That kind of independence earns respect from allies and discourages exploitation by rivals. It changes the balance of power, making relationships more balanced and negotiations more honest. At the same time, self-reliance is not the rejection of partnerships. It is the redefinition of partnerships. India showed that it is open to working with the United States or any other country, but only on equal terms. Partnerships rooted in dependency are unstable. Partnerships rooted in self-reliance are strong. Trump's aggressive tactics may have been designed to test India's resolve, but they ended up highlighting India's determination to never compromise sovereignty for short-term gains. India's focus on digital infrastructure, renewable energy, and innovation further reinforced this stance. These sectors symbolized a nation ready to lead, not follow. By building internal capacity, India created the confidence to stand tall in global disputes. It sent a message that while trade and cooperation are welcome, they are not survival lines. They are choices, not necessities. That subtle but profound distinction is what makes self-reliance the truest form of power. Unity is India's greatest weapon. The strength of a nation is not only measured in the size of its army, the numbers of its economy, or the extent of its resources. True strength comes from the collective will of its people, their ability to stand together, and their determination to defend their dignity as one. When India hit back at Trump, it was not simply the decision of a government, it was the reflection of a larger spirit shared by more than 1 billion citizens. The refusal to bend under pressure came from a deep well of national unity that made it possible for India to take bold actions without fear of internal collapse. India is a land of immense diversity. Languages, religions, traditions, and cultures vary across its vast territory. Yet, when faced with external challenges, that diversity transforms into solidarity. The confrontation with Trump was not seen as a government versus government issue alone. It was viewed as a matter of national pride. People across the spectrum understood that the dignity of their country was at stake and that unity mattered more than division. This collective sentiment gave India's leadership the confidence to respond firmly. Leaders know that when the people stand behind them, even the most powerful external pressure can be resisted. Unity has always been the shield that protects India. In times of invasion, colonization, or crisis, the unbreakable thread connecting its people has ensured survival and resurgence. When Trump attempted to use economic power as a weapon, that same shield came into play. Citizens were willing to accept short-term challenges such as higher prices or trade adjustments because they valued sovereignty more than convenience. That willingness to endure together made the nation unshakable. A divided country could have been manipulated, but a united India sent a clear message: you cannot break us by intimidation. The strength of unity is also visible in India's democratic foundation. Unlike authoritarian systems where decisions are imposed, India's decisions carry the legitimacy of public mandate. When the government took a strong stand against Trump's policies, it was not seen as reckless or isolated. It was seen as an act supported by the collective will of the people. Democracy gave that stand moral power. The world understood that this was not one leader's ego, but the voice of a nation standing together. That perception increased India's credibility, because unity in a democracy is harder to achieve and therefore more powerful when displayed. Unity also gives courage in negotiation. A country that is internally divided can be easily pressured with promises, threats, or manipulations targeting different groups. But when people present a single front, outside forces lose leverage. Trump's administration might have believed that it could use economic carrots and sticks to split India's approach, but what it encountered instead was a population and leadership aligned in purpose. That alignment neutralized the tactics and reinforced India's bargaining position. Unity transformed potential vulnerability into undeniable strength. Cultural pride adds another dimension to this unity. Indians share a deep historical memory of resisting external domination. From the struggle against colonial rule to the resilience shown in modern conflicts, the story of India is one of unity overcoming oppression. This cultural memory is not just history, it is living identity. When Trump tried to push India into a corner, that identity was triggered. People recalled that they had endured centuries of attempts to dominate them, and each time, unity was the force that enabled resistance. That collective pride made the nation's response not just a political act, but an emotional declaration of independence. Unity also magnifies economic resilience. When businesses, industries, and citizens align with national interests, a country can withstand external shocks more effectively. India's counter-tariffs were possible because there was a shared willingness among producers, traders, and consumers to bear the consequences for the sake of dignity. That kind of solidarity is rare but powerful. It ensures that external pressure does not fracture the economy, but instead strengthens internal resolve to innovate, adapt, and overcome. The symbolism of unity was as important as the actions themselves. The world saw a country of 1.3 billion people standing behind its government, refusing to be bullied and acting with confidence. That vision impressed allies and challenged rivals. It reinforced the idea that India's true power does not just come from its resources, but from its people's ability to stand together in moments of trial. When unity is visible, it becomes a form of deterrence. Other nations think twice before attempting to impose their will, because they recognize that unity makes resistance much harder to break. Unity is also India's greatest weapon because it bridges internal diversity. No matter how many languages are spoken, how many festivals are celebrated, or how many religions are practiced, when the question is about national pride and sovereignty, Indians unite. This unity is not uniformity, it is strength in diversity. The fact that such a diverse population can come together under one flag sends a powerful message to the world. It shows that India is not fragile, not divided, and not easily manipulated. Instead, it is a fortress of collective determination that grows stronger in the face of external threats. Respect is earned, not demanded. This truth has been proven again and again throughout history, and it applies not only to individuals, but to nations as well. A country cannot simply order the world to respect it. Respect is not a gift, it is not charity, and it is not something that can be bought or forced. It is built through actions, through courage, through consistency, and through the strength to defend one's dignity. When India hit back at Trump, it was showing the world that respect would not be begged for, it would be earned. This act of defiance was not arrogance. It was proof that India was ready to demonstrate its worth on the global stage. Trump, as a leader, often believed that his position and his country's power were enough to demand respect from others. His America First policy was rooted in the idea that others should simply accept America's terms because of its size and influence. But the world does not function that way, especially in the long run. Power without respect creates resentment, and resentment weakens relationships. India understood this dynamic and chose to teach a powerful lesson. Respect comes when nations act with self-respect. By refusing to bend, India earned recognition not only from the United States but also from countries everywhere who watched the confrontation unfold. Respect is earned when a country defends its interests with confidence. If India had quietly accepted Trump's tariffs and policies, it might have avoided short-term conflict, but it would have lost credibility. Other nations would have seen it as weak, a country that talks about being a rising power but submits under pressure. Instead, by retaliating with its own tariffs and by speaking openly about fairness in trade, India showed that it had the backbone to protect its dignity. That firmness earned respect. It proved that India was no longer in a position where it could be taken for granted. Earning respect also means taking risks. There is no respect in playing safe all the time, in always compromising, in always staying quiet. Respect comes from showing that you are willing to sacrifice short-term comfort for long-term principles. India's decision to counter Trump was a calculated risk. It knew there would be economic consequences. It knew that the relationship might suffer tensions. But it also knew that by taking that risk, it would build a reputation of strength. The willingness to face discomfort for the sake of dignity is what makes others stand up and take notice. Respect is earned not only through defiance, but also through contribution. India has consistently contributed to the global community, whether by supplying medicines during health crises, by participating in peacekeeping missions, or by being a voice for fairness in international forums. These contributions matter, but they must be paired with firmness in defending national interests. By hitting back at Trump, India balanced both sides of respect, being a constructive partner when treated fairly, but being unyielding when treated unfairly. This balance makes respect authentic rather than superficial. Another dimension of earned respect is consistency. If a nation fights back once but compromises repeatedly, its actions lose meaning. India has shown consistency over time, from defending its sovereignty in wars, to refusing to sign unfair global treaties, to asserting itself in trade disputes. This pattern of behavior builds a solid foundation of respect. The world knows that India is not unpredictable, but it is also not weak. It is consistent in its principle of equality. That consistency is what gives weight to its actions, making every response credible and every stand meaningful. Respect is also tied to perception. On the world stage, perception often creates reality. When India acted firmly against Trump's aggressive tactics, the perception shifted. It was no longer just seen as a developing nation trying to fit in. It was seen as a strong player demanding fair treatment. That perception influenced how other nations engaged with India, and it enhanced India's standing in future negotiations. Perception of strength is as important as strength itself, because it determines how others choose to interact with you. Respect is earned when a country acts with principle, not just convenience. Trump's policies were transactional, focused on immediate gain. India's response, however, was rooted in principle: fairness, equality, and sovereignty. Principles give legitimacy to actions because they are not just about one moment, they are about a long-term vision of justice. By showing that it would not accept disrespect under any circumstances, India elevated its position from transactional bargaining to principled leadership. That leadership naturally commands respect. Respect is earned through resilience as well. A country that collapses under pressure loses credibility. A country that withstands pressure, adapts, and emerges stronger gains admiration. India has demonstrated resilience for decades, overcoming economic struggles, security threats, and external manipulation. Trump's challenge was another test, and India's response reinforced its image as a resilient power. That resilience is a magnet for respect, because the world admires nations that cannot be broken.